Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Today I want to talk about playing gigs and some of the unforeseen things that can go wrong when you're on a gig. I've been playing professionally now for around 15 years, and throughout the course of that time, all sorts of different things have happened on gigs where some scenario will pop up where there's a piece of equipment that you need that you don't have, or just certain scenarios where your life would be a lot more convenient if you had brought a certain object with you to the gig. Playing gigs can be very unpredictable, especially if it's at a place that you've never played at before. And because I've had some things go wrong on different gigs that I've played on over the years, it was stressful in the moment when it was happening, but in the end it did end up becoming a learning experience for me. And over the years, I've sort of developed a list of things that I always try to bring with me on all gigs, basically to ensure that nothing will go wrong, and if something does pop up, there's something that can always take care of it, and basically you can get through any gig very smoothly with very little risk of anything going wrong. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions to these rules, and you can't always factor for every single thing, but after, a lot of years of different things going wrong on gigs, I think I've come up with a pretty good list of 12 items that you can bring with you on every gig, and it should, hopefully eliminate as much stress as possible. As most of you are aware, I am a guitar player, so a couple of these items are going to be guitar specific, but there's also going to be a good handful of these items that can apply to any instrument. So right now, I am going to take you through 12 items that I always bring with me on every gig. And I'm going to start with a couple that are going to be a little bit more obvious. I'm sure a lot of you are already doing a lot of this stuff already, but there might be a few within here that you haven't thought about that might make your life a lot easier on gigs. So starting out, a very obvious one, I always bring an extra pair of strings with me. All it takes is having one gig where you break a string and you don't have an extra pair, and that really complicates things. And I didn't learn my lesson with this one right off the bat. I actually had to play a couple of gigs where I broke a string and didn't have an extra set on me before I started keeping them on me at all times. I just leave them right in my guitar bag, and even though it's highly unlikely to break a string on a gig, it still does happen from time to time. It actually happened to me twice this past year, and in both instances I didn't have an extra set of strings because one of them was on an acoustic guitar, and I never thought that I would break a string on an acoustic guitar during a gig. But since then, I started packing acoustic strings as well. And then on another gig, it was a hollow body where I was playing 12s. And because the strings were so heavy, I thought there's no way I would break one on a gig. But like I said at the beginning, gigs are very unpredictable and there's no way to know exactly what's going to happen. So because of these couple of different mishaps, I just always carry an extra set of strings on me whenever I'm playing a gig, no matter what. And that way, if you break a string, you can just put a new one on really quickly, get it tuned up, and then you're good to go. Okay, another one that's going to be probably pretty obvious to most people is a tuner. I like to use a clip-on tuner so I can just do it, I can turn my volume down and tune in between songs really easily without making any disturbance. But this is something that a lot of people also don't keep on them. And sometimes you'll hear people tuning out loud in between songs, and that's pretty disruptive to, a set of music, and you don't want to hear that in between songs. So super easy fix for that is either a clip-on tuner or a tuner pedal. And like I said, most people are probably already bringing this with them anyway, but that's another one I think you should always have on you at all times during a gig. Okay, a third thing that I always keep on me, and another one that's going to seem pretty obvious, is a pen or a pencil. I do a lot of gigs that require reading music, and there's no way to anticipate if there's going to be any last-minute changes to parts of the song, or different cues that you have to write in for yourself, different changes to the song form. And just in case any of that stuff ever pops up, it's really helpful to have something to write with so you can make some notes and help yourself get through the song more effectively. And while it may seem like a pen or a pencil is something that any establishment should have, I've been in scenarios before where we've needed something to write with and we couldn't find something, and that is a really big inconvenience, and it's actually kind of frustrating because it's one of those things that you think like, come on, you have to have a pen or pencil somewhere. But again, all it takes is one instance where something like that happens, and I just leave these in my car. I just have a whole container of mechanical pencils that I leave in my car, so they're with me at all times, and if I need one for a gig, just bring it with me and I'm good to go. Alright, another thing that I always bring with me is an extra cable, just in case, especially if you're using pedal boards and you need multiple cables. I've always been lucky with cables on gigs. Nothing has ever gone wrong, but I have been playing at home before, playing through the amp, and then one of the cables dies, and I never want to risk that happening on a gig, and if it does, I want to be able to take care of it immediately. So just keeping a couple of extra cables on you is just a really good insurance policy for that. Okay, this next one is going to be the last one that's guitar specific, but one other guitar item that I always bring with me is a guitar stand. This is one of those things where I don't think it's 100% necessary, but it does make your life a little bit more convenient, especially if you're on a gig where you're doing a lot of sitting around and waiting. I like to just be able to leave my guitar on the stage, on the stand, and then when it's time to go out and play, you go out there and it's, there ready for you. It also, to me, just feels a little bit safer than leaving your guitar in a case, just sitting around somewhere backstage. Once I started leaving it on the stand, up on the stage, I just felt better about it. And again, it's just something that makes your life a little bit more convenient. Okay, another thing that I always bring with me is a music stand. This is something where, again, you can get a lot of benefits from this, even if you're playing a gig that doesn't require reading music. A lot of the stuff that I do is reading music, so I need a stand, and oftentimes a lot of venues do have stands, but again, you can never be 100% sure, so I always prefer to bring one just in case. But even if you're not doing any music reading, maybe you need to take a couple of notes or make some changes to a set list, or you just need something to have as a reference for something that's going on throughout your performance. And a music stand can just be a really great thing. Just leave it off maybe to the side of where you're playing and just have some notes if you need them to help you get through the set. But I've noticed a lot of people will leave pieces of paper with notes on the floor. And while that can be beneficial, sometimes I think it's harder to see stuff that way. And if you're playing in a venue that's not very lit up and it's dark, it can be tricky to always be able to decipher what's written. And I find that a music stand is, closer. It's more of a good angle for your eyes. It's just easier to see in general. So a music stand could come in handy for any type of musician on a gig, whether or not you're reading music. All right, another thing that I always keep in my car at all times, just in case if I ever need it, is a 3-prong converter. This is something that you won't likely need very often, but I have been in a couple of scenarios where you're plugging in your equipment and the outlets are only 2-prong and your amplifier is 3-prong, which obviously makes things a lot more complicated. And this was one of those things that I never even really thought about bringing with me until it actually happened, because it's not something that you typically encounter a lot in day-to-day life. Most of the time, at most of our houses and most of the places where we do work and stuff like that, there's typically always 3-prong outlets, but there are still places that you play that will have 2-prong outlets, and keeping one of these on you just in case just eliminates all of that risk. This one I just leave in my glove compartment of my car, and like I said, I barely ever need it, but if I ever know that I do, it's right there, and it just makes things a lot easier. Another thing that I always bring with me is a power strip, and this is something that you probably will need to use pretty often, especially if you're playing in a group with a lot of people. If it's more of a smaller, sort of like a duo or a trio setting, maybe not, but if you're playing in a full band, it is highly likely, almost guaranteed, that you're going to need a power strip. And again, these can be things that the places you're playing at do have, but it's always better just to keep it with you just in case, because you never know, and you never want to be in a scenario where you don't have enough power for the entire band. So again, a very easy thing just to keep with you at all times. Bring it with you on every gig, and then if you need it, you got it, and if you don't, then you don't have to worry about it. All right, another thing that I always bring with me, and this has really been a lifesaver on multiple occasions, and it's one of those clip-on lights. So, you clip it onto your music stand and then it lights up. And this is something that I never really thought about bringing with me until I was on one gig and the lighting was just super dark and I had to be reading music and it just made things so complicated. I was like squinting through the gig the whole time trying to decipher the music with all of this dark lighting going on. And it was just a really inconvenient sort of playing experience. And from that point on, I just got one of these and I just leave it in my guitar case at all times. And if I'm ever playing a really dark sort of gig, I just clip this onto my music stand and I turn it on and I can see everything great. And I cannot overstate how helpful this has been on certain gigs. So this is another great thing to have with you just in case if you ever need it. Okay, another great thing to keep on you just in case is an extension cord. I keep 2 of these in my car. I have one that's on the shorter side and one that's very long. lung, which I barely ever have to use, but it's good to have just in case, especially if you're playing outdoor sorts of gigs, whether it be a wedding or an outdoor party or anything where you might be playing far away from a power source. Again, I've been in a lot of scenarios where getting, power to where we were playing was complicated, and I find that having a couple of different length extension cords with you can make things a lot less complicated anytime you are in a scenario where a problem like that might arise. Alright, another thing that I always leave in my car just in case, and if I'm allowed to use it on a gig, I will use it, is a tip jar. Most of the time, if you play gigs at restaurants and bars, they're usually pretty cool about you putting out a tip jar. Every once in a while, there might be a place that doesn't allow it, but in my experiences, almost every restaurant and bar is fine with you putting out a tip jar. And it's one of those things that a lot of people don't think about doing, but sometimes all it takes is just leaving a tip jar out, and all of a sudden, people walk by and they see it and then they just put something in there, and it's impossible to anticipate how much tip money you're going to make on a gig. But I've been on gigs before where we've made an extra $50 to $100, maybe even over $100 per person on a gig just from tips. So if I hadn't put out the tip jar, none of that would have ever happened. So this is something where it cannot do any harm. You just put it out, and if people are feeling inclined to tip you, they do, and then you find out how much extra money you made at the end of the gig. Okay, the last item, the 12th item that I always bring with me on gigs, and this is something that I cannot say enough good things about and something that I think is extremely important, and these are my musician plugs. So I want to do a whole separate video talking about ways to prevent hearing loss as a musician and different complications that come from being exposed to a lot of loud sounds like ringing in the ears, tinnitus, which is something that I have to a very mild degree. But I've been using these for probably 10 years now. For anybody who is not familiar with what musician plugs are, they are a special fitted earplug that you actually have to get fitted to your own ears. So you have to go to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and they do a molding of the inside of your ears, and then they make these earplugs that are specifically designed for the size of your ears. So these are the types of earplugs where you can't try them on, like you can't try on somebody else's pair, because they're specially fitted for your ears. But I've been using these forever, and they are so much better than conventional earplugs. They're a lot more clear, and I take no issue with, wearing these on every gig that I play. I can still hear everything in a very clear and effective way, and it's protecting my ears from hearing damage. And ear protection is something that I don't think enough musicians take seriously. The majority of people that I play with and work with don't typically wear any sort of earplugs, and there are a few that do, and a lot of times when you meet other people that wear these, there's almost like a sense of camaraderie around it. But these are invaluable to me. I will wear these on gigs for the rest of my life. I think as musicians, our ears and our hearing is one of the most important things to us, and anything that I can do to preserve my ears and try to alleviate as much hearing loss as possible, I will do it. So I highly recommend any musician who is not familiar with musician plugs, definitely look them up and try them out and see what you think. Like I said, I have no problem with them. I wear them on every single gig, and I always will. And I think these are really important to anybody who is looking to preserve their hearing for as long as possible. So those are the items that I always bring with me on every gig. Like I said, most of these things are going to ensure that if something goes wrong or some sort of complication comes up on a gig, you should be able to get through almost all of them with these items. And if you feel like I've left anything out, that is certainly possible. So if there's any additional stuff that you like to bring on your gigs, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. Alright, that is it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you at the next video. Take care.